Today is May 9th. Welcome to Big Book Daily. My name is Rob. I am an alcoholic. It's a thrill, honor, and joy to be here with you today as we journey through the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. Today out of the Big Book, we're going to be reading from the core text, Chapter 4, We Agnostics, pages 47 through 49. And out of the Personal Stories, Section 2, They Stopped in Time, we are going to begin Story 14, The Perpetual Quest, by reading pages 388 through 390. And finally, out of the 12 and 12, we are beginning Tradition 3 by reading page 139. So with all that, my friends, hope you're doing well this morning. We've been given a brand new set of 24 hours, and we get to decide the kind of people we want to be today. So with that, let's go ahead and get to the good stuff. Chapter 4, We Agnostics, page 47. When, therefore, we speak to you of God, we mean your own conception of God. This applies, too, to other spiritual expressions which you find in this book. Do not let any prejudice that you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. At the start, this was all we needed to commence spiritual growth, to effect our first conscious relation with God as we understood Him. Afterward, we found ourselves accepting many things which seemed entirely out of reach. That was growth. But if we wished to grow, we had to begin somewhere. So we used our own conception, however limited it was. We needed to ask ourselves but one short question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there's a power greater than myself? As soon as a man can say that he does believe, or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. That was great news for us, for we had assumed that we could not make the use of spiritual principles unless we accepted many things on faith which seemed difficult to believe. When people presented us with spiritual approaches, how frequently did we all say, I wish I had what that man has. I'm sure it would work if I could only believe as he believes. But I cannot accept as surely true the many articles of faith which are so plain to him. So it was comforting to learn that we could commence at a simpler level. Besides a seeming inability to accept much on faith, we often found ourselves handicapped by obstinacy, sensitiveness, and unreasoning prejudice. Many of us have been so touchy that even casual reference to spiritual things made us bristle with antagonism. This sort of thinking had to be abandoned. Though some of us resisted, we found no great difficulty in casting aside such feelings. Faced with alcoholic destruction, we soon became as open-minded on spiritual matters as we tried to be on other questions. In this respect, alcohol was a great persuader. It finally beat us into a state of reasonableness. Sometimes this was a tedious process. We hope no one else will be prejudiced for as long as some of us were. The reader may still ask why he should believe in a power greater than himself. We think there are good reasons. Let us have a look at some of them. The practical individual of today is a stickler for facts and results. Nevertheless, the 20th century readily accepts theories of all kinds, provided they are firmly grounded in fact. We have numerous theories, for example, about electricity. Everybody believes them without a murmur of doubt. Why this ready acceptance? Simply because it is impossible to explain what we see, feel, direct, and use without reasonable assumption as a starting point. Everybody nowadays believes in scores of assumptions for which there is good evidence, but no perfect visual proof. And does not science demonstrate the visual proof is the weakest proof? It is being constantly revealed, as mankind studies the material world, that outward appearances are not inward reality at all. To illustrate, the prosaic steel girder is a mass of electrons whirling around each other in an incredible speed. Those tiny bodies are governed by precise laws, and these laws hold true throughout the material world. Science tells us so. We have no reason to doubt it. When, however, the perfectly logical assumption is suggested that underneath the material world and life as we see it, there's an all-powerful, guiding, creative intelligence, right there, our perverse streak comes to the surface, and we laboriously set out to convince ourselves it isn't so. We read wordy books and indulge in windy arguments, thinking that we believe this universe needs no God to explain it. Were our contentions true, it would follow that life originated out of nothing, means nothing, and proceeds nowhere. Instead of regarding ourselves as intelligent agents, spearheads of God's ever-advancing creation, we agnostics and atheists chose to believe that our human intelligence was the last word, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and end of all. Rather vain of us, wasn't it? We, who have traveled this dubious path, beg you to lay aside prejudice, even against organized religion. We have learned that whatever the human frailties of various faiths may be, those faiths have given purpose and direction to millions. People of faith have a logical idea of what life is all about. Actually, we used to have no reasonable conception whatever. We used to amuse ourselves by cynically dissecting spiritual beliefs and practices when we might have observed that many spiritually minded persons of all races, colors, and creeds were demonstrating a degree of stability, happiness, and usefulness which we should have sought ourselves. All right, man, there's some loaded pages here. We'll come back to this in just a minute. Okay, so we are on 388. This is story 14 of They Stopped in Time, The Perpetual Quest. This lawyer tried psychiatrists, biofeedback, relaxation exercises, and a host of other techniques to control her drinking. She finally found a solution, uniquely tailored, in the 12 steps. We're going to be reading pages 388 through 390 today. When I was a newly minted lawyer starting out in the practice of criminal law, there were 5 of us in our law office. My favorite lawyer was an eccentric, disheveled, wild-eyed Irish law professor who was brilliant or crazy, depending on your point of view, constantly cleaning out his pipe bowl with a black fingernail and tossing back vodka martinis whenever he got the chance. Then there was a new but world-weary litigation lawyer who told endless tales of his former life of white wine and bouillabaisse under the Mediterranean sun as he conducted his exporting business on the Riviera. Why should he leave such an ideal, wine-drenched job in sunny climes to slog away at law school? I kept wondering. There was also a giant, good-hearted bear of a man who today is a judge who spent more time listening and helping others than he did practicing criminal law. Into his office landed a pair of know-it-all, fast-acting, but not too experienced young lawyers, my husband and me. Within a dozen years, 3 of these 5 promising lawyers were dead from alcoholism, struck down at the peak of their careers. The judge is still and always has been a sober judge, and I somehow unwittingly, and even while drinking, turned into a corporate counsel and later, thankfully, became a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. The professor's kidneys gave out from one too many martinis. The exporting lawyer kept drinking until he died, despite a liver transplant. My ex-husband died in a fire on what was to be, he had said, his last drunk before going to AA, again, when I was 10 years sober. I have been to too many premature funerals due to our good friend, alcohol. My husband and I met and married in law school in a romantic haze of alcohol, twinkling lights, and much promise. We stood out as the only young married couple in our class. We worked and played hard, camped and hiked and skied, threw fabulous parties for our sophisticated friends, and prided ourselves on staying away from drugs. In fact, it was fear that kept me away from the drugs. Fear that I might not get called to the bar. That's the other bar, the legal one, if I were convicted of possession of illegal street drugs. More importantly, my best friend was wonderful, powerful alcohol, and I loved it. Until I was 4 years old, I lived upstairs from a tavern where I saw a few drunks bounced around. My mother worked for relatives who also lived over the tavern, and whoever had time looked after me. Despite my pleas, my mother married a violent man, and we moved away to a life that made my tavern life look really holy. I kept running away back to the tavern until it was demolished. I still fondly look at the pictures of that place. By the age of 14, I had my first drunk, which ended in a minor police visit to my home. By the age of 18, I was a daily drinker, and by the age of 21, I had my first year-long binge in France, which I euphemistically referred to as my study year abroad. I came home very sick and drunk. A few months later, I went to bed with a bottle of scotch one night and decided that I would go to law school. If you are having trouble, try something that is even more difficult to show them. That was my philosophy. It was enough to drive me to drink, and it did. At law school, we used to drink a lot of beer in student pubs, debating whether rocks had souls and what was the nature of the judicial process, as though it had never been considered before. As new lawyers, my husband and I eagerly beavered in the office early in the morning before running off to court to fearlessly defend the downtrodden. Lunch was the training ground for the perpetual quest for the best martini. Usually 2 or 3 of them, good for taking away the knot that by this time had permanently lodged itself in my stomach. I didn't know that it represented fear that I was not a fearless defender at all. Afternoons would be full of creative legal arguments in court. If court finished early, maybe we'd make it back to the office. Maybe not. Evenings we drank with the best of them. Lawyers, writers, media types, everyone vying to tell the best stories, which of course got funnier and funnier the more we drank and the later it got. When I drank, the fear evaporated and I became articulate and apparently very, very funny, or so they said then. Years later, I drank so much that I was no longer funny. But at that time, the drinks and the stories and the camaraderie were as wonderful as I was witty. We would get home to sleep by 1 or 2 in the morning, and the next day we would be up early to start it all over again. The fortitude and resilience of youth made us invincible. All right, some great stuff here. Come back to this in a minute as well. And finally, my friends, we are on tradition number 3 out of the 12 and 12. The only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. Page 139. This tradition is packed with meaning, for AA is really saying to every serious drinker, you are an AA member if you say so. You can declare yourself in. Nobody can keep you out. No matter who you are, no matter how low you've gone, no matter how grave your emotional complications, even your crimes, we still can't deny you AA. We don't want to keep you out. We aren't a bit afraid that you'll harm us, never mind how twisted or violent you may be. We just want to be sure that you get the same great chance for sobriety that we had. So you're an AA member the minute you declare yourself. To establish this principle of membership took years of harrowing experience. In our early time, nothing seemed so fragile, so easily breakable as an AA group. Hardly an alcoholic we approached paid any attention. Most of those who did join us were like flickering candles in the windstorm. Time after time, their uncertain flames blew out and couldn't be relighted. Our unspoken constant thought was, which one of us may be next? A member gives us a vivid glimpse of those days. At one time, he says, every AA group had many membership rules. Everybody was scared witless that something or somebody would capsize the boat and dump us all back into the drink. Our foundation's office asked each group to send in its list of protective regulations. The total list was a mile long. If all those rules had been in effect everywhere, nobody could have possibly joined AA at all. So great was the sum of our anxiety and fear. All right, I love that. I absolutely love this. It's all inclusive. You are an AA member if you want to be an AA member. The only requirement for AA membership is the desire to stop. I've been in meetings where somebody was drunk, pretty obviously drunk, and we didn't shun that person. If anything, it was a great reminder that there we were. There we could still be if we pick up that first drink. Because they're us, Of course, they have to make the decision if they want the help. But I think by me doing my part to try to help them any way I can, whether it's hand them a big book, let them know when the next meeting's going to be, give them some phone numbers that they can call, whatever it may be, the only requirement is the desire to stop. I love it. We don't want to keep you out. We aren't a bit afraid that you'll harm us, never mind how twisted or violent you may be. I love that line right there. People were willing to get their hands dirty to help me. And I'll always be grateful for that and want to pay that forward. And guys, I know we're running up on time, so I'll make this as brief as I can. On We Agnostics, I love on page 47. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? As soon as a man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he's on his way. And that tells me to keep an open mind. You may have some prejudices. I have had some prejudices of God and of organized religion. I had those. I viewed God as an angry God that was going to get me, that I could never live the perfect life, and therefore he would abandon me because I didn't follow this rule and this rule and this rule and this rule. That was my old conception of God, and I never felt good enough. But over time, people told me, change your conception of God. Who would you like God to be? What would you like God to be like? And for me personally, I saw God, I wanted a God that loved me unconditionally, and that knew my flaws and chose to love me anyway. I'm cutting myself open here, but that's the God I wanted. And I just kept imagining myself as a child sitting on a bench, and the God of my understanding wrapping his protective arm around me, saying, no matter what, I will never leave you nor forsake you. That's the kind of God that's continued to help me stay sober one day at a time. But, I had to be willing to change my old beliefs and give this a try. And that's what I think We Agnostics talking about. Just keeping that open mind. And I love this. Have the willingness to believe. Or, as somebody told me once, pray for the willingness to be willing. That's a good first step right there. And finally, the biggest thing that stands out to me from the personal stories today is people with promising futures, their lives cut short because of alcoholism. And not to end on a morbid note, but this is a disease. This is an epidemic, just like drugs, just like food addiction, all kinds of things, where people are dying way earlier than they should have to. Alcoholism is a painful death. I've heard many horror stories. It's just a shame what it does to people's lives. So it's just a reminder to me how serious this disease is, but also that there's hope, and how incredibly amazing sobriety is. It's life-changing. Speaking of sobriety, if you are sober today, my friend, you are a miracle. And those who love you are very proud of you. I thank you all so much for listening. And if we are given another set of 24 hours, I look forward to seeing you back here tomorrow.